Hello, my name is Marion Watton and I am Senior Global Mobility Manager for APAC with Parental Choice. Parental Choice is dedicated to assisting working parents and carers achieve the family life that suits them best. We do this through providing assistance directly to individuals and families, such as school and childcare searches, bespoke relocation and orientation assistance, and through our corporate partners where we support diversity and inclusion and employee wellbeing programs. It's my pleasure to be participating in this Mental Health Live Day, an initiative of community business and sponsored in 2019 by Northern Trust. For this session, I am joined by Mr. David Sheehan. He is Head of Pastoral Care at Nord Anglia International School in Hong Kong. David has a master's degree in counselling, postgraduate qualifications in inclusion, learner support and psychology. He has an extensive experience in the UK, the USA and now in Hong Kong, providing social, emotional and behavioural support to ensure that every child in his care can thrive academically. In this session, we will be discussing childhood anxiety in times of turbulence, an issue that David, through his work in education, has come to see many facets of. So why are we looking at anxiety? Anxiety is receiving more recognition now as a significant factor in mental wellbeing and mental health. As an example for its significance, current statistics state that as many as 1 in 8 children and teenagers in the US, for example, suffer from anxiety, with generalised anxiety being the most common. But as few as 1% of these children who are affected will seek assistance. Anxiety will affect approximately 30% of the youth population of the US at any given time, but 80% of these people affected will not get help. And anxiety disorders have been linked to depression, negative impacts on academic performance, and an increased risk for substance abuse. So welcome, David.
Hello, welcome, thank you.
It's great to be talking with you today, and thank you so much for participating in this Mental Health Live Day 2019. By way of introduction, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do here at Nord Anglia International School, Hong Kong?
Yes, well, I got more involved in pastoral care through my teaching career. And over the years, I've become more interested in supporting children, not just with their academics, but obviously as a whole child through the whole experience, making sure that they're getting the best outcomes for their personal development as well. And because of that, I became more interested in looking at the psychology side, which is why I took a work break and went back to university for that. And then that progressed me on to doing the psychology course, the counselling course, the master's for that as well. So I've been lucky enough to work in schools that have been very supportive of mental health and pastoral issues that have allowed me to kind of stretch myself and investigate different domains of what it is that makes the child who they are, and learn about how we can best support them through their childhood experience.
And so are there particular ways that you work with parents and their children in the schooling environment to help find effective solutions to issues that might be experienced?
I think, the school provides a really good platform for us to be able to understand children better. We spend a large amount of time with your children. Obviously, you will always know your child best, but you don't necessarily see things as close as you are to your child. You might not recognise things. Every day, there's little tiny adjustments that children go through. You overlook sometimes, and you can't see what's happening, and it takes a teacher or takes the school sometimes to notice something and to start a conversation with you about a need that might be developing. Obviously, what we want to do as schools is to try and identify things early so we can put support strategies in place. But you don't have to wait for us, because if you have a concern, obviously, we want you to come and talk to us too. We want you to come and open up a dialogue with us so that we can work together and actually build a team around the child to get the best outcomes possible.
So, like many parents, I sometimes feel that I would love to have a better understanding of child psychology, and mainly because I think it would be very helpful in my understanding of parenting as an art form. And I'm really interested to know, what are some of the key moments, or perhaps we might call them stress points, that exist in modern childhood that perhaps didn't exist for people of our generation, and what impacts they can have on children's mental health?
I think it's really difficult, because we have to remember that, what is difficult for one child in their experience is not necessarily going to be difficult for another child it's a very subjective process that we go through.
Yep.
And we don't have fixed periods of time that we can say, okay, this is when the danger time is coming, we know this is going to happen. I mean, the only thing that I can think of straight away that is fixed for all children is when they go to school. And when they are transitioning from one school to the next, we know that's going to happen. It's going to be the same for everybody, so we put things in place to prepare for that. We know that there are going to be issues when a child meets their first experience with mortality, when they lose a pet or they lose a relationship with an adult or a child that they have. We know that will happen at some point. We can't predict when it will happen. So there are going to be key things that will happen to everybody sometime. But again, you don't really know how that's going to affect your child until you're in that process. But saying that, you can be prepared as a parent to make sure that you've laid the groundwork for those events as they happen or as they're going to happen in the future.
Okay. And do these sorts of transitions, be they emotional transitions such as through going to school or through experiencing a first grieving, have a greater impact on a child depending on the age of the child, or is again this very much an individual experience?
Again, I mean, mental health, you were talking at the beginning about mental health and the statistics. We have to understand mental health. It's not as if suddenly we have a mental health crisis that we're not aware of. We're becoming more aware of it, and the numbers are making us knowledgeable in terms of what the actual problem really is. We've always had anxiety. It's a natural part of our lives, and how we deal with that helps us. What we do understand now is that we need to be preparing, now that we recognise this issue, that we need to be preparing children for the rest of their lives so they can cope with every situation. Now, yes, there are things that will trigger children to suffer anxiety at different points, and there are things that will contribute to children developing anxiety disorders at the far end of the spectrum if they do not learn the strategies they need to cope with anxiety. But again, it is a very individual thing, and there's no one cause that creates an anxious child. There's not one thing that will suddenly make your child anxious in a given situation. We do know that a significant trauma, obviously we'll add to that, a significant event will cause some worry. But you have to understand that anxiety is really just your natural risk assessment process that you put yourself through. It's your body's way of looking around and trying to work out, are you safe? Are things going to be okay? And anything that will make you feel uncomfortable will start to trigger those symptoms. So if your child, for example, is here in Hong Kong and maybe you've had to go away for work, that's going to add to their kind of feeling that, okay, mum and dad might not be here. If then something else happens on top of that, it will increase the kind of level of concern that they have. So what we tend to see that children who develop anxiety for a fixed period, if we can identify what has triggered that, we can usually deal with those things. Children who have longer term anxiety, who have escalated to the point where it becomes unmanageable for them, there are strategies that we can put into place, obviously, but that does involve going through all of the things that may be affecting them and trying to work out what we can do to deal with those as they come up. So it is very subjective. It is down to each person's ability to cope with certain triggers or certain situations as they occur that will add to their potential really for developing or anxiety kind of sensation or an anxiety issue themselves.
Okay, and so given that it is so subjective, are there particular signals or changes in behaviour perhaps that parents and caregivers could be mindful of or try to be aware of that might indicate a child who is experiencing particular anxiety or heightened anxiety over a transition or a life event?
I mean, I think you've kind of identified the main thing really that we need to be looking for, and that's behaviour. Behaviour is a communication. It's the way that children have to show that they are dealing with something that they're not sure about or they want you to pay attention to. Obviously with younger children, they don't have the language or the knowledge to be able to understand what it is they're going through. So they're going to be acting in ways that express their concern, express their unhappiness about a situation. And for us, it's really to recognise certain behaviours or changes in behaviour and try to identify what might be causing that. Now, as children get older, we would hope that they would, be able to then communicate, be able to identify some of their feelings and emotions. But you can't underestimate the difficulty of actually understanding yourself well enough to be able to describe the nuanced feelings you might have in different situations. And at any age, they're confusing. I mean, even as adults who are dealing with anxiety or emotional issues, it's very complicated to be able to say what it is you're feeling and why you're feeling it. And sometimes we don't know why we feel the way we feel. So children have that difficulty on top of everything else. And on top of that, in addition, you have, whilst we talk about mental health now, and it is becoming more common, you still have a lot of stigma attached to that. We're living in a changing time. Mental health is a big issue at the moment, and the landscape in the next 20 years will probably settle where we have agreed language, we have agreed terms, we've agreed treatments, we've accepted the reality of the situation, and we can all deal with this in a similar way. At the moment, it's mismatched everywhere we go, that different people will handle this and different cultures will handle this in a different way. So children feel very uncomfortable opening themselves up as much as we try to teach them to. They feel that it shows weakness still, that they're going to be talking about these things. Now, obviously, when we get back to the behaviour, what I would be a millionaire. I could write a book if I could tell you this is the behaviour you need to look out for. I could do lots of talking engagements, but what we do know is that all the behaviours that children have, and there's not a great range, can be indicative of many, many situations. It could just be indicative of you've got an angry child who's upset about something. But ones that we have to be more aware of really are where children are changing their behaviours from what you would see in their normal routine. They're withdrawing or pulling back. They're avoiding certain situations or events. You might have children who are getting angry and you can't really understand what it is that's caused that. There's no kind of trigger that you can identify. Aggression is a difficulty, but you also have somatic symptoms as well. Children might not show those behaviours, but they might start to complain of stomach aches. They might start to complain of kind of chest pains and fluttery feelings. I mean, as adults, we know what it feels like to be nervous in a situation. Children don't know how to describe the butterfly feeling in your stomach. You have to teach them that. And also don't underestimate physical tension and how that can affect and cause pain as well. The important thing to take awareness of is the frequency of these things. Everyone feels nervous in a given situation. If someone doesn't want to go on stage and do their music test, it doesn't mean they have an anxiety problem. If you see that this is going on for a few days, again, it doesn't mean there's an anxiety problem. But if you're looking at weeks of behaviour where the headaches are still there, the stomach aches are still there, or the avoidance is still there, they don't want to come to school, they don't want to get on a bus, they don't want to do something, and it's a prolonged period of time, that's when you really have to notice. So if you have a concern or start to feel a worry, then write it down, make a record of it, just so you can track it and you can have an accurate picture of saying, oh, this has been 2 or 3 weeks now, maybe I need to talk to somebody about it.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I remember not that long ago, my 6-year-old has transitioned from an early years campus to a much bigger campus. And it was very exciting to begin with. And he was really looking forward to joining his sister, and that was amazing. But after a week or so, he started saying that he felt funny in the tummy, and we then had to have that conversation about that funny butterfly feeling that can be excitement, as opposed to that squirmy, uncomfortable feeling in your tummy, which could be just feeling a bit nervous and needing to get used to a new situation. So is that part of a preparation process that we as parents and carers can go through with children? Younger children perhaps needing education and assistance with the language used to describe situations that they're experiencing. Older children perhaps needing a little bit more reflection in understanding their own emotional response to situations. Are those the sort of discussions that people really need to be having, or is there something more that we should be looking at doing?
I mean, there are so many aspects to emotion and health mentally and everything else. You can't prepare for every single situation and every single discussion, and you can't sit with your child and go through the full range of things that they might be feeling in any given situation. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't send them to school. You'd have no time.
It might also create the problem rather than potentially solve it, I suppose.
But what you do need to do is develop that pattern of communication with your child, that you can talk about these things. You know, there's lots of research about why these things happen, lots of research to show what are the protective factors in given situations. And one of the biggest things that you can do as a parent is communicate with your child about what they might be feeling, how that might look in their bodies, and also compare it to yourself. You know, we as adults don't want to show weakness either. You know, we don't really want our children to necessarily think that we are worried or concerned, because we want to be strong, you know, positive parents. But it's much more beneficial to sit down and say, well, when I was going to school, you know, I really was nervous the first day, and this is how I felt, and it was really uncomfortable, and one time I felt this way, and going through that and showing your child that you actually have those feelings and emotions too, and this is how you have dealt with them, and you are modeling that process of, this is how it felt, this is what it looked like, this is what I did, and how I might have managed that, and who I spoke to. You're giving them strategies straight away. Now, as I said, you can't prepare for everything, but if you can get into that cycle of listening to your child, actually going through that, sharing about yourself and how you feel, and if you don't know an answer, tell them that you don't know what the answer is going to be. You know, don't be afraid to show that you're not knowledgeable about everything. You're not a mental health expert yourself. So just say, well, I'm not sure about this. Why don't we find out? Let's go and see what can we discover about this, so we can, you know, figure out what we can do. So get into that process, and it's a model then that you can apply when they're 3, 4, 5, actually all the way up to secondary schools, because the range of issues, obviously, I'm sure you're aware as parents, will become much more diverse, and some of them quite niche and some of them quite in depth. But being able to sit with your child and have a dialogue that you've opened for 10 years and a comfortable, you know, conversation that you can continue at any point is going to help them to come to you and say, something is wrong. What can we do? Can you help me with this? And then again, you say, well, let's find out, what can we do? Why don't we work on this together? Because you're in partnership with your child. You know, you don't have to be the champion that saves your child. You can be the person who is helping them along the way to hopefully saving themselves.
That's, I think, really insightful. It's really key that we're, as parents and carers, we are entrusted with these people to help them become the best versions of themselves and to equip them with the toolkits to survive life. I suppose that's the best way to put it. So we've spoken about how we could recognise a child might be suffering from anxiety through behavioural changes, that there are particular events and transitions, be it changing school, might be a life event such as grief, it might be hormonal changes like going through puberty, that can lead to or perhaps exacerbate anxiety that a child is experiencing. So as parents and carers, are there behaviours that children may exhibit that could mean that they are self-medicating, I suppose, you know, for anxiety in potentially not healthy ways? And that again might be behavioural, external behavioural symptoms, or it might be something more internal. Are there any red flags that...
I mean, I think it's very difficult because, first of all, you know, there's a certain age range that we're talking about.
Yes.
It's highly unlikely that it's going to be young children. So when you do get into secondary years, you do tend to find that children are more aware of and have more access to certain things, alcohol and drugs, for example, that they could be investigating anyway. But obviously, the signals that you're looking out for are not dissimilar to the other behavioural signals that would be seen in many other things. You know, you are looking for children who are withdrawn, you are looking for changes in behaviour. Obviously with self-medicating, some of those changes in behaviour will be of a short time span. So, you know, if you feel that they've changed in their behaviour one evening, there's always the possibility that something could be the cause of that. But what you do tend to find is that if a child is doing these things, it's going to be very, very secretive, and then there aren't going to be hugely overt signs that say, I'm experimenting with alcohol, unless they come home, you know, stinking of alcohol and visibly drunk. Or again, you know, with drugs, it's very, very difficult because you can't necessarily see outward signs physically that someone is under the influence of chemicals. You have to be able to look at your child and see if you can spot patterns of changed behaviour. It's one of those situations, again, if you think or are suspicious, you know, look at where you know there are going to be stress points. If you know there's an exam coming up, or you know there's coursework going on, or there's an event that would cause stress, then monitor them, keep an eye on them to see whether there are points where you think that, oh, suddenly they are very relaxed in a very stressful situation where you know this would not be the way your child would act. And then you have to ask questions. You have to get into that communication and conversation again. You know, as a school, we, from a safeguarding and child protection point of view, are monitoring all these things as well. And we're looking for changes in behaviour. All staff in schools are trained in monitoring these things to see if there are any signals that might indicate a need that a child has, or a concern that we might need to investigate further. So you have to be that as well. I'm not advocating in any means that you become a detective or a police sergeant and you're raiding people's rooms and looking for things, because you want to avoid the confrontation of getting into a situation where you are kind of at odds with your child about the situation. You need to maintain that communication and conversation if you want to successfully partner with your child to work through it. Now, sadly, you know, there are lots of things out there which can be damaging. So education is always best. You do need to be able to have that conversation with your child. You know, teach them about different things, teach them about the dangers of situations. We talk about it a lot in school, but you have to have that conversation with your child as well, so that everything is not compartmentalized in a school context. We don't want them to just leave school at the end of the day and think, well, that was a lesson in school, it has no bearing upon my life. You know, you have those conversations too. If there's a lot in the news about alcohol or self-harming or, you know, other things which children do, then sit with them and talk to them about it. But again, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have all the answers. You know, listen to what their concerns are, listen to their questions and say, you can work it out, let's find out. And then you will educate each other along the way, and you will learn more about your child and what their needs may be through a frank and open dialogue.
So it sounds like establishing a relationship of trust and communication early on is really important. But it's almost more important to then maintain that trust and that open dialogue as children age and go through teenage years and the transitions that they'll experience personally and socially, as well as academically, is really, really key. And then perhaps you mentioned earlier, if there's anything of concern, to maybe make a note of it, be it in a journal or a diary or just on a piece of paper, that if there's any concerning changes in behaviour, just to make note of it, because then that may help to identify some sort of new pattern of behaviour that's changed, that then allows for an open and trusting discussion rather than accusations and detective work.
Yeah, I mean, mental health, as I said, mental health is a spectrum. It's part of our lives. It only becomes a problem when your emotions and your mental processing and abilities impact upon your ability to lead a normal and healthy life. Now, we all go through periods where things affect us, and we all go through periods where we're up or down. If those things continue for a prolonged period, the frequency, the duration of that, then that is one of the things that a professional psychologist or psychiatrist would be looking for to try and identify whether there's an issue or a disorder that might need to be addressed at a much higher level. So knowing that, having that kind of understanding of, okay, this has been a few weeks, that is really, really important information because it's a diagnostic criteria. But, you know, the difficult thing with having this conversation, well, we know that children at all points, they're going to be confronted with all of these things because they are out there in the world. We confront them daily.
Yes.
It would be very naive of parents to actually think, you know, they're our child, we want to protect them and stop them and you know, facing any of these things. But actually, if you don't provide the strategies or, you know, a method for them to approach situations as they happen, you are not preparing them for life. You are actually doing them a disservice. But the difficulty is, I know, is in talking to children. I mean, as I said, there's no one cause for any mental health issue or anxiety. And actually, you know, it could be a one-parent family, two-parent families. It does have an effect on how you parent, obviously, and how you raise your child. But even in families where there's lots of love, there are still children who develop anxiety issues or mental health issues. Now, trying to protect your child from everything, we do know that is a problem because, you know, if you're shielding your child from all situations and you're avoiding everything because you're worried it might upset them and everything else, then you're not allowing them to experience things in a structured and safe way that will prepare them, you know, step by step for the things they're going to face when they, you know, are out there in the world without us, you know, without you, without teachers. They're going to be there at some point and they need to have those practice sessions, as it were, to deal with some of those things. Now, when you're having those conversations, you know, they are difficult. They're uncomfortable sometimes. It's uncomfortable to share about our own feelings and emotions and that feeling of weakness that we have. But, you know, when you're talking to your child, one thing that parents always tend to do is we fill the gaps for them and we create a dialogue for them. And children will latch on to whatever you're saying because it's the easiest way to get out of a conversation that they may feel uncomfortable with as well. So, you know, when you're talking to your child, don't be afraid of the silences. Don't be afraid of giving them time to think about what it is they want to talk about. Don't rush in with answers. We often go, did so-and-so do this? Did something happen? Did this happen? And they go, yes, it does. You know, my child, who is 7 at the moment, comes home from school and, something happened today. And I'm like, oh, talk to me about it. And I know that the first few questions he'll come up with an answer that, you know, I've had 20 years of experience working with children. So we sit and we discuss it and we talk around the edges. And it will sometimes take time to get to what is really happening. But you have to take that time to think. It's not going to be an easy presentation, particularly when you're dealing with emotions. And don't be afraid to have them show you things and demonstrate things. They can't tell you what it is that they might be feeling, but they can draw it. They can, you know, work out another way to communicate it. Have them act it out, but don't try to provide those answers for them. Let them communicate what they want to share, and then again, you come up with a plan together. But that can take some time. But you need to be actively listening to your child. You know, taking time out, a regular time where you can sit with them without your phones, without your devices, without the television. Maybe you can go out and have an ice cream together and you sit and talk whilst you're doing that. We sit down at dinner every day in our family and we have an evening meal, and that's when we talk about things, when we're having, you know, our dinner, and we discuss and we talk about our days and things, and that's part of our routine. And because of that, you know, we have this dialogue. If we don't sit and do those things, or I don't ask, how was your day, then I get told off because that's a really important point in his day. My son wants to be able to say, this is what happened to me and this is what's going on. So, you know, you have to make the opportunity and you have to be prepared to listen to what your child wants to say and not what you think they're trying to tell you.
Okay. And so then, given the need for active listening and having that open relationship and dialogue, when would you say that a family should consider seeking the assistance of an external professional if, you know, their own resources and their own understanding of what might be happening with a child needs, you know, the the assistance of someone who is specialised, such as a school education professional, such as yourself in a pastoral care role, or an independent therapist or paediatric psychologist even?
I mean, I think it is complicated because, again, it comes from that lack of knowledge that you have as parents, so you're not sure what to do and who to ask.
Yeah.
And it's not helped in some places or locations where you are, where there isn't always a clear pathway. You don't really understand who the professionals are and what they do. You know, you have psychiatrists, psychologists of many different types. They're all practicing different things. You have therapists, counsellors. So, you know, you really need to be able to go to someone who you know and understand, who can provide you with guidance on what the next steps could be. Jumping straight to a psychiatrist, you know, in some situations, yes. You know, I have referred myself children who needed that straight away because they were at a point where things had exacerbated enough that it needed that really quite high level diagnosis. But, you know, for a child who's having some anxiety, to be taken straight to the psychologist and possibly diagnosed by someone who maybe spends 15 minutes with your child is a big step. And it may not be useful for them to go through that. Because again, just because you're having anxiety does not mean you have an anxiety disorder. If you have at any point concerns and you're not sure and you're at a loss and you don't know who to talk to or what to do about it, then come and talk to the school. All schools will have somebody who will have knowledge in this area. You know, every school in Hong Kong now will have an inclusion or a support department. Our school's very special because we have a pastoral leadership role, which is the one I'm in. We have a counselling department, a support department. We have many mechanisms in place, but each school will have something in place where there will be a knowledgeable person who can say, okay, I know where you're at, and these could be the next steps, and they will be able to point you in the right direction of who to approach next, what specialism you might need to do, or at the first instance could just be able to say, oh, these are some strategies you could try, let's give this a go first. Because in lots of situations, early intervention can be quite simple and low level, but really impactful on a child because it teaches them that you are there to support them and care about them, and lowers that kind of feeling that they're in a risk situation or a danger situation. Again, anxiety is that risk assessment. So the moment you start putting in protective factors, that will lower in a child's mind and they will feel that in any situation they are safe and secure. So that can be your first step, just coming to talk to the school about that. You know, if it's during holiday time and there is no school, then, you know, you can always talk to a GP as well, and they will give you the basic information you will need. They may refer you to somebody else depending on what they think, or they may guide you towards, you know, some counselling or maybe some intervention that they can point you to.
Okay. And just bearing in mind the international audience for today's webinar, that we're likely to be having quite a number of people who are expatriates or living in a third, perhaps or fourth or fifth country, who have children who are TCKs, third culture kids. I would imagine that having that sort of pastoral care link and support through a school is particularly important if the family is living in a country where the culture is different from the culture, the home culture of the family. So is that, again, where that sort of, I guess, a common cultural understanding and basis of a discussion around childhood anxiety and transition issues comes in?
As I said, transition is a big thing, and being a third culture kid or working in a country that is not your own, it's a big transition for everybody involved. You know, the most important thing for your child is that there is some stability or some kind of normality in their life. So finding a school that they will fit comfortably within is really important, because again, it's 50-60% of their week is going to be within the school. So having that security around them where they can get to know that system, get to know those people, having a similar educational context really important. You know, when you're choosing schools, and this is a big decision for any parent to make, you know, you want to make sure as well that you have people who are in that school actively working on transition to support your child coming in. You know, it's not just a case of, okay, you're in, thank you very much, here we go. It's about monitoring your child, particularly within those first 6 to 8 weeks, to make sure that if there are any blips or kind of changes, that you are there as parents and the school to support them through it. You know, they have to find friends, they have to adapt to a different environment, they have to adapt to a different temperature, the weather. It's so many different things can affect how you feel and your comfort level. So we need to be monitoring all those things as well. So have that dialogue. Don't be afraid to come in and discuss with the teachers and say, well, you know, he's been uncomfortable about this, he's not quite sure about certain situations and things. Again, good schools will have all those things in place anyway, and it would almost seem as if you don't have to think about it because it's part of the practice they have. But as parents, you need to make sure and ask those questions to be able to support them. Now, if you do find that you are in a country and things are not going well and you do have concerns, you know, some countries are better equipped than others to deal with certain situations. What you would need to do, I think, is if you're looking for support, is try and find support that fits your beliefs as a family, that match your cultural beliefs of where you come from as well. There's a big difference in the way that professionals deal with situations depending on, you know, their own culture, where they trained, and their school of thought. There are still many schools of thought in psychology and how to deal with mental health issues. In the next 20 years, like I said, things will become much more, I think, standard, and we would have many more agreements on how we deal with things. But at the moment, there are still varying approaches to things. And don't be afraid if you do go to see someone or do ask for help and it doesn't seem to work or fit. Don't be afraid to actually say, this isn't working for me and I need to find somebody else, and go and find another professional. Because at the end of the day, the whole idea of mental health is about connection and relationships. And if you do not have a connection or a relationship, and the child doesn't have a connection or relationship with a counsellor or a support person or a teacher, you know, it's not going to make them feel good about opening themselves up or talking about things or dealing with difficult situations. So, you know, you have to have that choice. I've had or met many amazing counsellors who you could work with for 2 or 3 sessions who would change your life. And I've met and had counsellors who, for no reason, no fault, just didn't click with me as a person. And it just wouldn't be someone who I'd feel comfortable talking to. So, you know, we as parents make those choices every day. We have to be able to let children make those choices as well and not give up on the process just because one person didn't have the answers that you were looking for.
Okay. So unfortunately, we're coming to the close of our allotted time for today. However, before we conclude, I do have one final question, which is, how can parents and carers best protect children when they're living in locations that are perhaps experiencing turbulent times outside of the family home? Are there particular discussions that could be had around the news, what's going on?
I think it is difficult because wherever you're living at the minute, there seems to be things that are happening that have a lot of feeling attached to them. And the news is, you know, very emotional in itself. People's reactions to lots of situations are very challenging. And children are soaking these things up, whether you want them to or not. They're seeing these things happen and they need to process that as well. Part of our protective nature as parents is maybe to avoid those things and avoid talking about certain realities so that children don't worry about them. But actually they need to understand them. They need to be able to process and, you know, connect in their heads where things fit in their experience. So don't be afraid to sit and talk to them about it. Don't wait for them to ask questions. You know, if you can see something is happening, and maybe it could be related to global warming, it could be related to political situations, or, you know, a weather event, a quite serious one, an earthquake or anything like that. Don't wait for them to come to you. You can sit with them and say, oh, you know, what do you think about that? You know, how do you think this is happening, or why is that happening? Try not to ask the why too many times, because children don't often have the why. They don't really know why something is happening or why people are feeling. But you can always say, you know, what do you think is happening? What evidence do you have of that? And again, you're teaching them then to connect what happens to things that might cause these things to happen. And you're modeling a process of thinking things through critically, so that they can start to make those connections themselves. And again, that prepares them for later on. Again, you're not the expert in everything. I mean, I am certainly not an expert in global politics and all these kind of issues. But if it's enough to worry your child or enough to cause them to be interested, then certainly it's valuable enough or important enough situation for you as the parent to educate yourself and them, and thereby empower them to be able to, you know, put themselves in situations and change situations to make things better.
Thank you very much, David. That's all we have time for today. So on behalf of Community Business and of the event sponsor Northern Trust, I would like to thank David very much for his time today. I hope that everyone now feels a bit better equipped to recognise triggering experiences for childhood anxiety, as well as feeling better equipped to recognise signals of anxiety itself. We've spoken of a few methods to engage with children, namely communication, trust, and provided some ideas about how to initiate conversations with a child who you think might be experiencing anxiety, be that situational anxiety that's short-lived, or perhaps something that's a little bit more prolonged and more developed. Finally, I hope that anyone whose family is being affected by childhood anxiety recognises, as David has very eloquently put it, that it is okay to seek professional help and care. So if this session has raised any issues for you, or if you'd like to discuss any personal issues, please do get in touch with Parental Choice via our email, which is info@parentalchoice.asia, or through our website, www.parentalchoice.asia, and we can help to source appropriate mental health services in your location. This Mental Health Live Day 2019 continues. The next session will be with Megan Lamb, discussing how technology can be used in mental health solutions. Please be sure to tune in.
Thank you.
Thank you.